Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Accessibility Talks or ALI Talks. This is the monthly virtual meetup that you know and love, and we get to chat about digital accessibility, inclusivity, and usability. Each month, we invite a speaker to present a topic, and afterwards, we invite the community to ask questions and participate in the discussion. I'm your host for today. My name is Carrie Fisher. I am a senior accessibility program manager at GitHub, and I use the pronouns she, her. And today I'm wearing a tannish shirt with butterfly flower pattern, and I have shoulder length blonde hair. Before we dive into the talk, let's take a moment to remind everyone that our group is committed to creating a friendly and safe environment for all. We expect all participants, speakers, hosts, viewers on YouTube, and those commenting on social media to follow the Accessibility Talks Code of Conduct. This applies to all community interactions, including events, verbal questions, and chat and text channels. You can review the full code of conduct on our website at alitalks.com/conduct. Our goal is to foster productive dialogue where participants can share and learn from one another in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Got questions? Great, we love questions. This year, we're shaking things up and trying a new format. We're now inviting viewers to submit their questions ahead of time so we can incorporate them into the recording session. But don't worry, if you didn't do that already, you can also have conversations post on social media. If you have a question for our speaker, here's how you can ask. During the live stream video, type your question directly into the YouTube chat window. But if you're not watching live, you can still post your questions, add them to the comment section on YouTube, or share them on LinkedIn, Mastodon, or Blue Sky. Just be sure to @ us or include the hashtag AliTalks. That's A11yTalks. Direct links to all our social media platforms are listed on our website, and we look forward to hearing from you. Huge shout out to our bronze sponsors, Agile Collective and Principal Financial Group. We appreciate your support. I also want to give a shout out to our Alley Cat Club members who donate monthly to Alley Talks and are one-time donors as well. Thank you so much for your financial contributions. Want to see your name or organization recognized as a sponsor of Alley Talks and help fund these amazing monthly meetups? Visit our sponsorship page at alitalks.com/sponsorship to learn more. We need your financial support to compensate our amazing speakers and improve the live stream productions to provide the best content possible for our community. If your company uses Benevity for matching donations or gifts, you can double your contribution. Just search for Alley Talks, and we should appear as Alley Talks by Midwest Open Source Alliance. All right, and that's all for the housekeeping slides. Today we have Aubrey Sambor, lead front-end developer. As a fun fact, Aubrey, you say you haven't lived in the same apartment or house for more than 2.5 years?
Yeah, I've moved around a lot during my life. The longest I've lived in a place since I was a kid, since I was 18, was 2 years and like 10 months or something like that. So I've lived in maybe 26 different places. I know I have a list. I think
Oh my
17,
goodness.
17 different apartments, and like 4 houses and a bunch of dorms. So yeah, I've moved around a lot and I've lived in a bunch of different states. And yeah, hopefully at some point I will find one place to stay for 3 years. Hitting that 3-year mark will be pretty cool. So
You're forever
fingers
home,
crossed.
or at least
Yes.
you're 3-year home.
Yes,
That's
that's what I'm hoping.
amazing. Well, you must be really good at packing and moving. We'll have to touch base if anybody
Yep.
wants to get some packing tips as
Yeah,
well.
I can definitely do that. Yep.
But today you are going to be presenting color and CSS, and it's very exciting to hear about that as your experience as a front-end developer, a lead one at that, and your experience with accessibility. So our audience and myself, we're very excited to hear more. The floor is
Great.
yours.
All right. So I gotta share. All right. Thanks, Carrie. Hello, everybody. Welcome to May's edition of LA Talks. And I am going to be talking about color and CSS, using new spaces, functions, and techniques to make your site shine. As Carrie just said, my name is Aubrey Sambor. I am a lead front-end developer. I live about half an hour north of Boston, and I have been doing CSS for over 25 years. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I'm loving learning a lot more about what's new in color and what we can do to make it more accessible. So you can find me online. I'm mainly on Mastodon, so you can find me at labyrinth.social/starshaped. My website is aubreysambor.com. And then, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn as linkedin.com in Aubrey Sambor. Pretty straightforward. So what am I going to talk about today? A few different things. I'm going to talk about an overview of color spaces available today, what's new in the CSS color modules level 4 and 5, and also a little bit of what's coming in 6. I'm going to talk about new CSS color functions and how to use them. I'm going to discuss methods to change the values of color items within a color space. And finally, ways to make your site more accessible by using light, dark, and color contrast, which is still under development, but it's going to be a game changer once it finally lands in all browsers. First, I'm going to go over current color spaces available today. You might have heard about a lot of these ones, but I'm just going to go over them really quickly. First, I'm going to go over what a gamut is, because when I was first doing my research on color and CSS, I had no idea what this actually meant and how it's different from a color space. So I'm going to go over that really quickly first before I dive into all the different color spaces that are available today. So a gamut is a range of colors that are supported on a device. They're usually displayed as shapes within something called the human visual gamut. And the human visual gamut is a range of colors that our human eyes can see. Two examples of gamuts that I give, and maybe the ones you've heard, are sRGB, which again is what most of the web has used for a long time. And then there's a newer one called P3. Most Apple devices these days support P3. It's also called wide gamut, so you might have seen that referred to a few times. And the P3 color range is much greater than the sRGB color range, and that's what makes it a wider gamut. Next, there is a picture, a view of the human visual gamut. It's the huge color. It looks like kind of like a half oval. This is a view of all colors visible by the human eye. Well, yeah, like as good as it can be rendered on a computer screen. And if you can see it, and I apologize that if it's a little hard to see on the screen, but there's a triangle within the half oval that's multicolored. And this makes up the sRGB gamut, which is what the web has used up until CSS color module 4. There are other color spaces within this human visual gamut, but they have slightly different shapes depending on the colors they include. Like there might be ones that, I think the P3 gamut has a taller triangle, and on the top of this half oval is more green. The bottom is more blue, and the bottom right is more red. So if you have a taller triangle, there's more green in your in the gamut. And a color space, which is different from a gamut, is the arrangement of these colors within a particular gamut. They are displayed in different shapes depending on the space. I have two examples here. I have an example of what the RGB color space is, and it's displayed as a cube. So on the screen, I have a picture of a cube with blue on one side, red on the other, red on one, and green on the other, divided up into smaller squares so you can see which colors are which in this color space. And then I also have a picture of the HSL color space, and this one's often displayed as a cylinder. So there's an image of a cylinder with the hue going around as the circumference, saturation going from the inside of the circle out, and lightness going from the top and the bottom of the cylinder. So this is how it's visually represented when you're looking at colors with these color spaces. To summarize, a gamut is a collection of colors, while a color space is the arrangement of colors within that specific gamut. So now I am going to go on to the current color spaces. These are not going to be anything that some of these are not going to be new. Some of them, if you've been working with the web for a while, they'll be pretty familiar to you. And so the first color space we're going to talk about is the RGB color space. Again, this is probably the one you're most familiar with if you've been working on the web for a while. because it's the only color space you could really use up until CSS color module 4. So this consists of hex, named colors, the RGB, HSL, and the new HWB functions. And I'll go over all of these briefly in case you need a refresher on what all of these are. First is hex. A lot of people first learned how to define color in CSS. I know I did. I have an example of my fun color. I have a class name of my fun color set with the color of FF1493, which is this eye-searing pink that I really, really liked a lot when I was in high school, when I first learned how to write HTML and CSS. I had it as a background color on one of my sites way back in the day. I don't know why. It was the 90s, so that might explain it. But colors are defined using hexadecimal values from 0 to F, and they're defined by RRGGBB with red, green, blue. Next is named colors. These are a set of predefined keywords that represent these hex colors I just talked about. And this also includes current color and transparent. My example here is another class, my fun color, set to the color of blue violet, and that maps to a hex color somewhere on the spectrum. In the slides, I also have a link to a list of all the named colors that are on MDN in case you want to use those instead of hex. Next up is the RGB function. This mixes red, green, and blue to make different colors, hence the RGB. And there's different syntaxes depending on if you're before color module 4 or if you're after. But historically, the syntax has been RGB 0, 0, 0, with each of the 3 values accepting a range from 0 to 255. And again, I have another picture of that RGB cube that I showed a couple slides ago that has the blue on one side, the red on the other, and the green on the third. And if you want opacity, you can add a percentage to the end and use RGBA to add opacity to your RGB function. Next up again, I have brought this one up before, the HSL function. This arranges colors in the RGB space in that cylinder I was talking about, but this is in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness. So it's the same range of colors, but it's done in a different way so that you can get different colors and pass in different values that make a little more sense than RGB. This one you can do the hue, and the hue is represented as a degree from 1 to 360 or 0 to 360. And that will go around the color wheel. And then saturation and lightness are both represented with percentages from 0 to 100%. And again, for opacity, you would use HSLA, passing a percentage for the opacity value. Or you can have a decimal down there too, between 0 and 1. So before I get into HWB, I'm going to talk about a little bit about CSS color module level 4. So what's new in this color module? This is where color spaces other than RGB are represented. They're supported. And again, the big one is P3, but I also will talk about the CIE space in a little bit. And again, there are new color functions, HWB, which I've mentioned before, but then also lab and OKLab, LCH and OKLCH, and a more generic color function. And there's a couple other little nice things like the syntax update for color definitions where you no longer have to do RGBA if you want to have opacity. You can actually just put it on RGB using the syntax 000/50% if you need 50% opacity on your RGB. And there's also a new named color, Rebecca Purple, which is named after Eric Meyer's daughter, who sadly passed away from brain cancer about 11 years ago now. So it's good to have that representation. Okay, I'm going to go through the HWB function really quick. This one also is part of the RGB color space, like the other ones I talked about, like RGB and HSL. But this one does hue, whiteness, and blackness. It is a lot like HSL. It consists of the angle around the color wheel from 0 to 360, but then it's percentages of white and black that mix into it. So you can see, you can see, I have an image of what a representation of the HWB function. There is a color wheel around the outside and a triangle on the inside. And the triangle has parts of a color and then a white part and a black part. And within that triangle, there's a little circle that when you draw it around, that'll be the color represented by HWB. So if you need to make your color lighter or darker, you can use this function. I haven't really seen this function used very much. I feel like it's not widely used at all because there are other options like HSL that kind of feel a little more familiar than HWB. But if you need this kind of, if you need to control things this way, you can use this one. So one thing that is added to color level 4 is the color function. After creating separate functions for everything, a generic color function was created that takes the color space itself and 3 color channels, which are usually red, green, and blue. So there is an example here. You just do the keyword color, and then display P3 with the red, green, and blue channels passed in, again, decimals between 0 and 1. And I have a code pen showing what the display P3 looks like because the display P3 color space is a much brighter space. And I'm hoping this is going to require, I'm hoping you'll be able to see the difference between this. So I have a code pen here with there are two long rectangles. One of them is a color with a background using the RGB space, and the other one is a color using the P3 space. Now, depending on your monitor, both of these have a color of, both of them have a green color, but the P3 space one is slightly brighter than the one in the sRGB space. So this is just showing how to use the color function. Down here, you can, I have code on the right, CSS, that shows the RGB and the color function. Both of them are the same. They're passing the same 3 colors, but one of them is RGB and one of them is display P3. And again, you can see that you should be, I don't know how to say see. I'm not sure if everyone's gonna be able to see this. You can cut this part out. But color, oh man, I'm trying to figure out how to say this one. Again, cut this out. P3 has a brighter, more luminant color than the RGB space, which is why you might want to use the P3 space in case you want your colors to stick out a little bit more on your website. So those are RGB color spaces. Next up, I'm going to go through the CIE color space, which is new and only now supported with color module level 4. So this color space, it's actually been around for a long time, but there hasn't really been a representation online as to how this would be displaying on monitors and things like that. So the good thing about the CIE color space, it's modeled after how colors are perceived by the human eye. So it's something called perceptively uniform. HSL's lightness is not uniform across colors. You might see, especially if you have a yellow and a blue defined using HSL, the yellow will be a lot brighter. They look very uneven. But in the CIE color space, the lightness will be uniform across all of these colors. And I've got an example of this on the next slide if you're able to see. So I have an example of HSL, a color, it's like a rainbow defined using HSL, and I have a rainbow strip defined using CIE. And the difference here is that the HSL, the colors feel like they're all over the place and feel kind of jarring. The CIE colors kind of blend more seamlessly together because it's more perceptively uniform to the human eye. So that's the good thing to do. That's the good thing about CIE, is that it'll make things more, again, perceptively uniform. So I'm going to go through each one of these really quickly: lab, OK lab, LCH, and OK LCH. And I'm going to first go over the older ones. First, lab. This consists of lightness and 2 color channels. Kind of confusing. A and B don't really stand for anything in lab. but the A is arranged from red to green, and the B is arranged from blue to yellow. And you write it as lab with the A, L, A, and B. The lightness is a number between 0 and 100. The second parameter, above 0, it's more red, below 0, more green. The third parameter, above 0 is more yellow, and below 0 is more blue. So that's not super intuitive, but it's a way to kind of do the colors if you know what they all stand for. And there's an optional opacity for this one as well. LCH is similar to lab. Again, same color space, but this one is lightness, chroma, and hue. The lightness, again, 0 to 100%. Chroma differs depending on what gamut you're in. This one is usually between 0 and 0.5. Hue is the same as HSL. It's one of those color wheels between 0 and 360. This is easier to visualize than lab because A and B don't really make a lot of sense in LAB. All right, and next up, OKLab color space. And this one is a space that was created in 2020. So this one is a lot newer. It is almost the same as the CIE color space, but there are some color corrections that were done in here because there are some weird color shifts within the CIE color space. So the OKLab color space fixes these shifts so that there's even more uniformity. And this blog post, I have a blog post linked to in the slides, and this will detail the kind of changes that Bjorn Ottesen did. He's the one who wrote the blog post about this. And it's a lot of complicated math that goes over how to calculate the colors and how to calculate the uniformity. So it's really interesting if you want to read up more on that. So OKLab is the first one. And this is almost the same as lab, but there's a color correction noted. Again, it pretty much has the same parameters. It's just that the second and third parameters, for some reason, are between negative 0.4 and positive 0.4. Again, it probably has to do with the gamut and has to do with making sure things are within the right range. And these gradients are more consistent than regular lab. And I have an example to show you what a blue gradient looks like in the lab example versus OKLab. And you'll see here, I have the lab gradient. Let me make this a little bit bigger. This lab gradient is going from, it's a color mix from blue to white. And you can see up in my slides, I have one rectangle that is a lab gradient that is supposed to be going from blue to white. But instead of going from blue to white, there's a blue, and then there's a little bit of purple in the middle before it goes to white. So that's kind of some of the color math that needed to be tweaked a little bit in OKLab. And then the second example is an OKLab gradient with the same color mix from blue to white. But this one actually goes right from blue to white without the purple in between. So these are the kind of corrections that were made in OKLab to make it a little more color correct. Next up is OKLCH. It's got the same kind of color corrections, the same parameters. It just has those corrections that I was talking about earlier. So there's nothing really that different with it. There's a color picker, oklch.com. You can go there to actually go and mess around with making OKLCH colors. I'm starting to see more adoption of OKLCH in the wild, which is nice. So yeah, you can start using this now. I'm supported in all major browsers right now, so you're able to use this if you want to. And that's it for color module 4. Now I'm going to touch on color module level 5, which again adds even more color goodness to CSS. This one has a couple new functions that are important to accessibility. First one is the color mix function. This one I touched on a little bit in my last example, but it's the ability to mix colors within a given color space. There's relative color syntax, which is an easier way to manipulate colors using less code, which has been pretty useful. And the light dark function, which is a simpler way to change colors based on light or dark mode. And I'm going to cover this a little later on in the talk. First is color mix. This again gives you the ability to mix colors using CSS. without SAS or custom properties within an HSL function. And the way you write it is you say color mix, and then you specify which color space you want this to be in. My first example is an sRGB, and then you can mix colors in different color spaces. So I have a second example of an OKLCH. I have a link to some weird color issues using color mix using OKLCH. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look at my slides later on and click on a GitHub issue was discussing how to fix it. But I also have a code pen that shows how this color mix actually works. So my example here, I have two squares. I have a green square that says default color in RGB. Right next to it, I have a second square that is a lighter green that says lighter color using color mix. So the first one is just a background color of green and a color of white. And then for the lighter box, I have a background color of color mix and sRGB, and I'm mixing 50% white with this green so that it's the lighter green. And again, it seems like a really simple function, but it did not exist in CSS until color module level 5. So now you can do this without having to use SAS, which is pretty sweet. Next up is relative color syntax. This is a more concise way to manipulate color. Again, this is support as of 2024. This is supported in all modern browsers. So with this one, instead of having to separate out, if you're doing an HSL, I've seen people have a CSS custom property for the hue, the saturation, and the lightness. If they wanted to update one of these, they'd have to update that individual custom property to be a different value. With relative syntax now, you separate out the H, the S, and the L if you're using HSL, and you can add things on the fly to change the color or change the saturation or the lightness. In my example here, I have a calc that's adding 200 degrees to the hue, so it's making the hue a different color without having, again, separate out all the different custom properties in here. And I have a code pen here showing that. So I have a code pen that has two rectangles. There's a green one that says relative syntax, and then there's a purple one that says relative syntax hue shift. So the relative syntax rectangle is just defined as having a green background, and I have it defined as an HSL custom property. The other background I have set as the plus, where is it down here? I have a background color with the calculation with the plus 200 degrees. So now it's a different color because it's in a different position on the color wheel, in case you wanted to do that. And you can do that with the saturation or the lightness. This comes in really handy if you have a design system that you want to have color palettes that are similar. You'd be able to add plus or minus 10 or 20 or whatever range you want to have like a mix of different colors in your design system. So that comes in really useful there. So next up, I'm going to talk about some color functions that help with accessibility. I think that's what we're all here for. So let me talk about these for a little bit. The first one here is light dark. There are some people who prefer light mode, some people who prefer dark mode, and it's good to have both as an option in case people prefer a lighter mode, in case people prefer a darker mode, and a way to toggle between the two. But this right here is more concerned with how to add the styles depending on if you're using dark or light mode on your system. It used to only be supported in Firefox, but now it's supported everywhere. So now you can actually use it. And you declare all this in the root of your CSS file. You define a color scheme to be light space dark. And then you define colors to be light dash dark with the first color. The first parameter is the light mode color, and the second parameter is the dark mode color. I've got an example of this in CodePen as well. I have two rectangles on the screen. Both of them right now have a light gray background. One of them says prefers color scheme, and the other one says light dark. So both of these are, and my computer is currently in light mode. I should specify that this is light mode. So the way I have it defined is that the background color is the lighter gray, and the dark background in the text color is number 333, which is the darker color. Now, if I go in here and I'm going to emulate dark mode in here, I'm not sure if you can see my my web developer tools, but I'm just going in here and changing it to be the dark mode. I know it's in here somewhere because I saw it earlier. Is I have enable automatic dark mode. So what should happen when I check this box is that the color scheme will switch. So now what you see, or what I see on the screen, is I have the two rectangles now have a darker gray background and a lighter gray text on it. Now, prefers color scheme was the way you did this before light dark existed. Light dark just makes it a little bit easier to write your styles so that you're not writing as much code. So it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice to have this so that you have contrast, so you're able to be able to switch between light and dark mode a lot easier. So it's a really good thing to have to make it easier. Next up, and this one's the coolest one, and I wish this was available everywhere, but it's experimental, called contrast-color. This one has actually gone through a lot of changes within the last couple of years. I gave this talk a lot in 2024, and back then this was actually called color-contrast and did a whole bunch of different things. But sometime in 2024 or 2025, the WebKit team went ahead and changed it to contrast color, and now it only takes one variable. And right now it's only supported behind a flag in Safari. So hopefully it'll actually be available everywhere so that people can actually start using this. And this iteration of contrast color is part of color module level 5. And this contrast color function in level 5 resolves to either black or white, depending on the user agent that the browser provides, mainly how the browser defines it. There isn't really any, I was digging around trying to find what this actually means, and it means whatever the browser decides is the contrast they want to have it resolve to. I did some testing with the color contrast analyzer tool just to see at what ratio the colors actually started flipping. And Safari uses the WCAG AA text ratio of 4.5 to 1 for small text. So that's what causes it to switch between black and white in at least Safari's implementation. I'm not sure if what other browsers would do if they would follow this same ratio, but we don't know because Safari is the only one who supports it now. And I can show you that right now in Safari. So this right now is in Safari. I have the flag turned on, and it's a sky blue background with the text testing the contrast color function in CSS. Below it, there are some controls for hue, saturation, and lightness. This is forked from a code pen that Dave Rupert made a couple years ago when it was still using color-contrast. But I just wanted to show you what this looks like when to see what this contrast color function will do for you. So I'm going to draw, I have a slider with the lightness to change the lightness of this background color. So if I drag it down, you'll see the blue is getting darker, or the blue is getting darker. And at some point, the text will flip to white. So that is using whatever Safari's user agent ratio wants to resolve it to. And currently right now in Safari, like I said, it's at 4.5. So once it's at that ratio, it'll flip it to white. Again, this is a pretty rudimentary way to put it in, but it's a start. Hopefully it'll continue to improve and you're able to do more with it. And that is the plan, because more enhancements to contrast color are coming in color module level 6. So in this one, this will take a list of colors, and the first one in the list is either the foreground or the background. The background is more common, and then a target contrast level to test against. And if none of these colors have sufficient contrast, the base color is tested with white and black. and we'll fall back to white if both match. Again, base color keyword is TBD. Literally in the W3C documentation, it's TBD. So this is still a working draft. This might actually change, but I have an example of what theoretically what this would look like. So you do contrast color, you have wheat as the background, and there's a keyword that's called TBD-BG. At some point, this will have an actual name. And then after that, you pass in what algorithm you want to use to resolve the contrast. This example has the WCAG2 function with AA passed in. And then there's a list of other colors that they're trying to match against wheat to see if the contrast resolves to an actual color that would have sufficient contrast. Now, I think this probably still has a lot of work. I mean, the color module level 6 draft is still under like super working draft. So there's a lot of changes that could come. But this is just to show that they are trying to work on this to make it more usable so that you can detect contrast without like actually having your browser automatically detect the contrast with a specific algorithm that matches WCAG guidelines. Now, I'll touch a little bit on the keyword and WCAG2 function. These are also part of level 6. This function takes keywords, either AA large, AAA large, or a contrast ratio that you can just pass in. And the keywords all compute to what these all are according to WCAG. So AA is 4.5 to 1 ratio, AA large is 3, and so on. You can also pass a random ratio if you want. There's probably some use cases for that, but I would think you'd want to stick to a lot of the WCAG2 ratios that they provide. I don't know what the keyword, just the WCAG2 keyword that doesn't have the parameters you pass in. I was trying to find that information on the W3C documentation, but couldn't find it. So I don't know what that is, but the function does, I think, what you want it to do. And so none of this is supported anywhere. I don't have any code pens to show for this one, but hopefully this is a thing that gets resolved pretty soon so that we can actually start using this to build websites, because this one would be pretty great. So wrapping up, there are so many new things happening with color in CSS today. There are new color spaces such as HWB, Lab, and OKLCH, new functions such as color, color mix, and so much more. Easier ways to manipulate color variations using relative color syntax, and functions to help with accessibility such as light, dark, and contrast color. If you want to read more about any of these, I have a lot of links on this page. You'll be able to see them in the slides, so you can read up on all the different things I talked about color-wise. Again, this is my information. You can find me online on all these places. Mastodon is the best place to get in touch with me. But again, you can go to my website or to my LinkedIn too, if you want to find me there. And yeah, thank you very much. Open to any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aubrey. The demos, I think, were especially helpful in explaining what you were trying to convey. So we really appreciate that as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop your share, or you can do that if you have
I
access
just
to
do
it.
it. Yep.
And I will go ahead and share mine because we do have some questions that came in. When we were talking before the presentation today, one question you said that comes up often is how to provide fallbacks for browsers that don't yet support the newer code spaces. Do you have any tips or best practices for handling that, especially in a way that doesn't compromise accessibility?
Yeah, one way to provide fallbacks, or pretty much the only way to really provide fallbacks, is to use an at supports. You can do a not at supports. Like if it doesn't support OKLCH, then define RGB colors. You are going to want to make sure that those are also accessible. I know there are some converters you can use out there to convert OKLCH to RGB or something like that. And as soon as I'm making the assumption that your OKLCH colors are already accessible, already have sufficient contrast. So if you just use a converter to change them to RGB and put them up behind a supports flag, then whoever doesn't have or whatever browser you're using, if it doesn't support OKLCH, it'll fall back to these RGBs that are actually supported by all browsers right now.
Yeah, and kind of a add on to that question that wasn't asked, but I'm kind of wondering in your observation, like how often are these kinds of CSS browser, um, how quickly are these changing essentially? Like, are you looking at it 1 month and you're only getting a low support, and then a couple months later you get a higher support, or what is kind of the trajectory of somebody who really is excited about this kind of, new thing, which we all should be, but kind of is anxious to be able to use it, but may not know how long they have to wait.
Yeah, these changes have happened really fast. I first gave this talk in 2024, and I gave it a couple different times throughout the year in 2024. I had to
Mhm.
change it before every single presentation because browsers were supporting the things that I was saying were not supported by all browsers. So I had to rewrite this talk so many times. I even had to rewrite it when I was giving it now too, because light dark wasn't supported by all browsers when I was first writing this. Relative color syntax wasn't supported by all browsers when I started writing this too. OKLCH is actually supported by all browsers now, but the supports is still really good to have in case you have to support older browsers for some reason.
Mhm.
But yeah, right now a lot of these are supported, but it's moving really fast. Like everything in CSS is moving really fast right now, which is great. But except for when you're writing talks and you have to make sure your talks are up to date too. That's always the challenge though.
That's so interesting. And I do remember that from my front end dev career, RIP. But yeah, it seems like it's a moving target, but there's so much you can do with it now. And especially in terms of accessibility that you couldn't
Hmm.
do even a couple years ago. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So another question that came in, can you walk us through how the light dark function supports accessible dark mode design? Are there any limitations to be aware of for our users with more complex needs like high contrast settings?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of how this would support accessible dark mode design. I think you just want to make sure, like, if you're developing a dark mode, it's kind of this, it's the same rules apply for a dark mode in general. There's a lot of advice out there to not use like a stark black background. Like, if you're going to have a dark background, don't make it, hex 000, which is black. You might want to do a super dark gray that's close to black. And likewise, when you're having text on top of it, for the most part, you're probably not going to want to have it be white. You would probably want it to be a light gray. Now,
Mhm.
again, this doesn't satisfy everybody because there are high contrast settings. It used to be called high contrast mode in Windows and in IE 11, but now
Mhm.
it's a forced colors mode. And that is actually more user specified colors. So you do want to make sure that you write your code so that when a user applies their colors that they would want to use, that you're able to actually change that. One thing that you really want to take care of when you are using the forced colors is that if you're using a box shadow anywhere for contrast or for underlines or anything like that to do something
Mhm.
stylistic, the forced colors mode, if someone has forced colors mode, a box shadow is not displayed. Box shadows are eliminated. So
Mhm.
you might run into some contrast issues if you don't have that box shadow anymore. So instead, to go around it,
Interesting.
there's some support rules for forced colors, and you can go ahead and put a border there instead, just so you still have that kind of contrast. Or if you put a border around a button as opposed to having a box shadow there, you'll still have that button contrast that you'd be missing if you hadn't had that. So there's little things like that that you can do
Mhm.
with force colors to ensure contrast, especially with color.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I think people, having done a few accessibility audits in my day, kind of get confused about what border versus box shadow,
Mm-hmm.
gradients, right there. Anything that's a little bit um, related to shading, I would say, or highlighting in the sense of like the box outline, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, is a little bit confusing. So yeah, that's good to know. That's a great call out for that. All right. So the contrast, speaking of color contrast, the contrast color function does sound very powerful. How reliable is it today for meeting those WCAG color contrasts across those different browsers? So this question seems a little bit like one that you've answered, but do you want to
Yeah.
elaborate specifically on this?
Yeah, so the contrast color function, as I was saying earlier, right now it's only implemented by Safari, and in the specs, the W3C specs, which I read a lot of when I'm talking about contrast color, I dug right into those docs try to make sense as to what this algorithm was and how the color contrast requirements are being met. And right now it says in the specs that it's up to the user agent to provide this algorithm. And I actually went through WebKit's GitHub PRs to find how they were defining this right now. This is how deep in the
Hmm.
weeds I got with this because I find it really interesting. And yeah, they like browsers just are writing it themselves. I don't know if there's going to be any standard, at least with the version of contrast color that's in color module 5, which is the current
Mm.
one that's out right now. With color module 6, it seems like they're trying to standardize it a little bit more by providing that WCAG2 function that you can pass in. And then the
Hmm.
browsers will have to interpret that by doing some other kind of resolver that's like stuff that I don't really know how to code, but it's in C++. I know that in WebKit, that's what they use for all this. But yeah, that's the way that the standards, the W3C is specifying browsers implement this. So I think it is going to be up to how the browsers implement. And I'm hoping
Hmm.
all of them come to a consensus to have this be similar so that this contrast will be similar across all browsers so that developers aren't having to write a lot of different things
Hmm.
and that it's consistent so that contrast is sufficient on all browsers and not just say Safari or just Chrome or something
Yeah.
like that. So yeah,
I mean, that's
it's
kind of the dream, isn't it? I mean, like
yeah.
you, as a developer, front end developer, you can, or even a designer, right? That you can
Mm-hmm.
design and develop how you would like. And then when people need certain color contrast requirements, right, the browser can serve that up, even if
Mm-hmm.
you hadn't thought about it. Not saying you would do that, but maybe you're newer to the field,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or maybe it's something that um, yeah, you didn't plan for, didn't design for. And so it's like this kind of built-in backstop essentially
Yeah.
for
And
resolving issues. Yeah,
And yeah, you'd want to make sure too, like the thing with this contrast color function is I would want to I obviously still test for contrast
of
if this
course.
ever goes in and it's used widely because I'm a little, it's powerful, but I'm a little worried sometimes that some of the contrast might not pass. So
True.
I'm a little worried about that too. But always check, always do annual tests and check and make sure that it still works.
Well, ironically enough, the next question was asking about testing. So, when using functions like that color mix or that contrast color, what's the best way to ensure your colors still pass accessibility tests?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of answered it. It's mainly making sure, like using contrast checkers, testing like forced colors, testing what it looks like as a colorblind user or other color, like things that render color a little bit differently. And a lot of browsers have that kind of testing functionality in here. I'm using Vivaldi now as my browser,
Oh,
and
cool.
that
Yeah.
actually it's Chromium, so it uses the same Chrome web
Mhm.
tools as Chrome does. So you can test all those, and again, real users also, if you know anyone or have it tested by people who are colorblind, people who can't see like blue, yellow, like the other I can't remember what they're all called, but they're all the different
Mhm.
you see only like yellow, things like that. But you can test them all in browsers or yeah, if you like have real people look at this to see if the colors actually work. So yeah, just test is pretty much what it is. Contrast, any kind of simulations,
Ah,
emulators, real people,
no,
all the
no
things.
shortcuts is what I'm
Nope.
hearing. Not yet.
Yes, no
No, no
shortcuts.
shortcuts.
Don't assume that the tools are right all the time. So,
True. That's a good.
yep.
That's a good call out as well. All right, if you have time, we have one last question, and it's talking
Yeah.
about the future. So, do you think we're getting close to that future where CSS alone can handle all of the color contrast needs in an accessible, standards compliant way?
I think we're getting there with contrast color. I think that's the big one because I feel like that's the big one that really stopped people up. I mean, that's one of the
Hmm.
biggest, when you look at the Web A1 million that comes out every year, always the biggest accessibility issue is contrast. So this will at least fix contrast. Like it's a starting point to fix contrast. So I think
Hmm.
it is getting closer, especially with contrast color. So, but again, I always think there's always going to be people are always going to be involved. Like I don't think there's ever
Hmm.
going to be a time that only CSS or only code is going to solve some of these accessibility problems. There always has to be a
Yeah.
person there too to make sure that things are actually accessible. So we're getting there, but I don't think it's ever going to be the end all be all solution to make sure accessibility everything's accessible for everybody.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that you're saying the front end developers and designers and accessibility professionals, we have a job for a while
Yeah,
still.
yeah, we're going to be employed for a bit.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again, Aubrey. That is the last of the questions. And so I'm going to just kind of finish this up with some house cleaning things, but we do appreciate your time today. And all the links that Aubrey said during the talk will be posted on our YouTube channel and the live chat, and also ways to get a hold of Aubrey if you have additional questions or just want to be in contact. It sounds like Mastodon might be the best place
Hmm.
to find you,
Yep,
but
and
also
you can.
your website has links to your other socials or other ways to contact you.
Yep. And LinkedIn is another good way to contact me
Okay.
too. So I'd say Mastodon or LinkedIn are the best ways to contact me.
All right. Well, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Like, like I said, I'm going to do the house cleaning here. So we are always looking for speakers and new voices in the accessibility community. We make a conscious effort to include marginalized groups and tech in our speaker lineup. If you're interested, please reach out to us at team@alleytalks.com, or you can also find us on our socials and reach out there in the DMs, especially on LinkedIn. For those with IAAP certifications, Alley Talks speakers and attendees receive professional development credits. I just learned just last week they're called CAECs, CAECs, CAECs for short, and through your IAAP continuing education. Looking for feedback. We love feedback as well. So if you have some feedback, go to alleytalks.com/feedback. Surprising. Surprise, to share your positive and or less than positive feedback. We value your input. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel and never miss a talk. You're already here at youtube.com C/accessibility talks, but share with your friends. But we're also on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Mastodon. You can find those in the slide right here, or you can find those on our website, alleytalks.com. Thank you again all for attending. We'll see you next month.